Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily. That is what we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We turn now to a really compelling poem in the Johnson edition, poem 327, Before I Got My Eye Put Out. Now, just hear that single line. Emily does this so many times. We've noticed it so many times. It is another poem here about perspicacity, epistemology, the very notion of insight, what it is that she understands about herself and about her poetry. This one was included along with the previous poem we just studied, 326, in a letter to Higginson. You'll remember that we said in that lecture that the question for Emily was, are these more orderly? And that's an interesting question, and we'll obviously play around with why she would even ask a question like that about a poem like this. Now, this poem was titled Sight in 1891. It is another poem about perspicacity, and of course Plato comes to mind immediately. Now, our assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. I'm hopeful that you worked through our set of introductory comments where we introduced you to our big five, as we call them in 303. What does this text say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are, and the ways in which those obviously dance together, to use the metaphor of the previous poem. And as well, psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind, and then finally, the question of theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering in this world? Some have called this one of Emily's most painful poems. We'll maybe have to ask why. I'm hopeful that you've read as well all of the preceding 326 poems. If you have, we just finished with 326, I Cannot Dance Upon My Toes. If you have done that, then you can place this poem in a context that is, I think, more compelling. Now, as we said, Emily's reading of Plato, and especially the cave allegory, I think stands behind a whole lot of what's going on here. You'll remember, we've given full lectures on Republic at learnstrong.net, but you remember as the individual is drug out into the light of the sun, blinded by the light, we're obviously going to see this when the eyes are put out in the light. Now, there is another quote that she made to Higginson that I think is significant here. Emily was an intensive perceiver of nature in the world and of poetry. She once said to Higginson in letter 342, she said it this way, it's a famous quoted line, if I read a book and it makes my whole body so cold, no fire can ever warm me, I know that is poetry. If I feel physically as if the top of my head were taken off, I know that is poetry. Is there any other way? Now, I think that in this poem, she'll be talking about the moment when you have some kind of epiphany or insight and how that just blows you away, and then do you want to come back to that or not? The other thing we should point out is that Emily struggled with eye problems, as we've said in earlier lectures. She did end up in Boston with some eye treatments in 1864 and 65, and she did at times worry that maybe she was going blind, so obviously that one works. Think about then Emily in that tradition of Tiresias, the blind prophet, or Oedipus, who at the end, when he gains insight, finally blinds himself to realize that he's done the horrors that he's done. This, as we said already, this is, for some people, some readers, one of Emily's most painful poems. And we might ask, in a poem like this, are we actually watching Emily's turn inward and the willingness to somehow step away from the world of intensity? Let's see how you read it. Before I got my eye put out, I liked as well to see as other creatures that have eyes and know no other way. But were it told to me today that I might have the sky for mine, I tell you that my heart would split for size of me. The meadows, mine. The mountains, mine. All forests, stentless stars, as much of noon as I could take between my finite eyes. The motions of the dipping birds, the morning's amber road, for mine to look at when I liked. The news would strike me dead. So, safer, guess, with just my soul upon the window pane, where other creatures put their eyes, incautious of the sun. Now, the fact that she ends with the word sun helps us to think about our study of Plato's Republic 7 and the cave allegory. Remember the sun, of course, the symbolizing of all that is the good. She'll say it this way: before I got my eye put out. In other words, before I decided there were certain things I couldn't see anymore. I liked as well to see as other creatures that have eyes and know no other way. Back to epistemology with the study of knowledge. In other words, she says, have to dance between, on the one hand, seeing the sun, looking at the sun, the brightness, the dazzlement of the sun, or being like most everybody else and deciding not so much. She asks or suggests, were it told to me, notice capitalized today, that I might have the sky to encompass everything, have the experience of full intensity. For mine, I tell you that my heart would split for size of me. And she's back again to the idea of the overwhelming power of the epiphany and her small stature. She emphasizes that often in her poetry. Notice a repetition of the word mine. The meadows, mine. The mountains, mine. All forests, stentless stars. She doesn't continue with mine. You get the drift. As much as noon as I could take between my finite eyes. And the key word of this poem is finite. There is the finite, there's the infinite. The infinite. And she says, what if somebody came to me and said, you can have the experience of all of nature, all of it, right? The mountains, the meadows, the forests, the sun, the stars, all of it. She says, I think it would overwhelm me. She says, I do, I worry. The motions of the dipping birds, we're going to get to that in our next poem, in our next study, at the very end of poem 328 with the flying bird. The morning's amber road, obviously the sunrise, for mine, to look at when I liked. In other words, anytime I wanted it. The news, the epiphany, would strike me dead. So notice we go from splitting to striking. I mean, it's a compelling poem. She says, I want to know, but I don't know if I did know, if I could live with that knowledge. So, safer. Notice the transition. Guess, with just my soul, upon the window pane, where other creatures put their eyes, incautious of the sun. Well, it seems here that she's definitely asking, what does it mean to really perceive the world? Now, when we get to poem 1071, we're going to come back to this poem, because this is some powerful stuff she's playing with. She says it this way. Perception of an object costs precise the object's loss. Perception in itself, again, replying to its price. The object absolute is not. Perception sets it fair. And then upbraids a perfectness that situates so far. Emily is, among all the other things she is, philosopher for sure. Brilliant, brilliant. Well, what exactly is it that she's arguing in this poem at 2:8? I think that she's saying that insight can be, at times, overwhelming, dazzling, if you will. That is to say, one wants to see the light of the sun out of the darkness of the cave. Now we're using, obviously, Plato's referencing. But it can be overwhelming. It can be, inspiration can be at times overwhelming. At 2b, well, think about how the rhymes in all of this are quite remarkable. They create a certain kind of dissonance, we might say, right? That would work for this denial of the light of inspiration, as we might think of it, right? Or the desire to see certain things. Notice, see, way, sky, me, stars, eyes, road, dead, pan, sun. And then think about all the assonance that's going on here. I, my, I, liked, right? Or the alliteration, told, to today, might, mine, meadow, mountains, sky, split. We commented on that, right? And of course the consonants as well. As creatures, eyes, in stanza 1 are mountains, meadows, stars, eyes, and forest, stentless stars in stanza 3. It's quite remarkable. Emily is in fine form here, playing the game of trying to explain just how challenging it is to see beyond things. And then what is the stamp, we might say, poetic stamp, spiritual, intellectual stamp, that ultimately leads to this. The great scholar priest has comments on this poem that the pianist Charles Rosen once played all 32 sonnets of Beethoven in one day. And when he was asked about it, he said that the physical endurance needed was manageable. But he said the spiritual intensity of the experience was almost too much for him. And Priest goes on to suggest Emily from a poem like this would have understood something like that. At 3A, the Romantic poets obviously come to mind. Think about Wordsworth. My heart leaps up when I behold a rainbow in the sky. So was it when my life began, so is it now I am a man. So be it when I shall grow old, or let me die. It's that dance, right, between wanting to know and celebrate the power and force of nature and being so blown away by it, you're not sure you can live with it. Think about James Joyce, and of course, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and his whole treatment of the Epiphany there. And of course, we mentioned Plato's Republic 7 and the Cave Allegory. Finally, to own a poem like this at 3B, what was a time when you had an epiphany or an insight, and it was overwhelming for you? Some of you are reporting some of that's happening even now as you're reading these poems by Emily. I hope so. Thank you.